Hello and welcome to Wine and Crime. This is a place where we sit down on the floor on our lazy asses, drink some wine, and talk about some crime. Today's story contains conspiracies and upsetting turn of events. So if you're not into these, you should probably click off right now. Kurt Sonnenfeld. He is one of those guys that if you meet them, maybe they do something wrong, maybe they punch you in the face. Maybe you're dating Kurt and he cheats on you. He feels like the type to me that would come up with the most elaborate, bizarre-ass excuse that wouldn't even make sense. So they punch you in the face and then they come up with this crazy excuse that they have kinetic gravity energy in their right elbow that just prevents them from stopping their muscle movements. He had it since he was 6 and then he kind of chilled out in it, and then suddenly this magical condition came reaching back in his 30s, but it only arises on Tuesdays when he's stressed out, never on a Wednesday, just on a Tuesday. Like, they could have just said sorry, but they came up with this crazy magical condition. And then you just get so confused, you don't even understand and you can't even argue with them. If you look at Kurt, he's kind of attractive. I mean, not my type, but generally speaking. He had a good job, and when he was younger, he met a woman by the name of Nancy. They lived in Denver, Colorado. Nancy is a beautiful woman. She's gorgeous, she's smart. She got a job in a very high position in advertising. At a big company. She was just killing it. So you could consider both of them as really being educated, if not above average in their professions. As a couple, they were sophisticated, they had so much class about them. They had this aura, but they were just really put together. Very well dressed, attractive, young, and successful. He worked as a videographer slash photographer for FEMA. Okay, sorry, I just left for an hour and then I came back because I was hoping that by now the construction workers would be done. They're not, so we just have to deal with some annoying background noise. So, oh yeah, Kurt worked for FEMA. He went to these emergency areas, these disaster sites, and he videotaped, photographed them. He got flown out to different natural disasters, sometimes not so great areas where tragic things happened. So he had this wonderful job, they got married, and you would think that these two career-driven, great, successful people would have a successful marriage. But it didn't work. And that was because Kurt had a huge problem with alcohol and drugs. So even though he had this amazing job, Nancy was still the breadwinner. Their marriage was on the rocks, it was really tense. It seemed like they got along, but at the same time, it just felt really comfortable sometimes. So they decided to go to Thailand and have their little vacation. Maybe it will even save their marriage. So they flew to Thailand, but things didn't really go as planned. Nancy was really close to her family, and she called her sister. She was so hysterical, she was crying, and she said that she couldn't find Kurt. It had been a full day, and she couldn't find him. He had gone out to buy something, and he didn't come back. Like, she was alone in Thailand, Kurt was alone in Thailand. She was thinking the worst case scenarios. She started searching for Kurt. Everywhere she could. She didn't really understand the language, but she was trying her best. A couple days later, she did find Kurt in a hotel room with 2 different women who was totally drugged out. Now just imagine how she felt. Like, you go on this fancy trip to save your marriage and he doesn't even think about the consequence of leaving his wife for these 2 strangers. Like, that's not the brain of someone who is just slightly addicted. So at this point, when they got back to the United States, Nancy immediately filed for divorce. Kurt was telling a lot of people about this, and Nancy was confiding in her family. And listen to this. Kurt was saying that she was ruining their finances by doing this. A lot of people suspect that he was only angry because basically Nancy just cut him off of a lot of credit cards that she founded, and which he was constantly using for, buying stuff that he was using and do this and that. It seemed like he probably had a lot of debt and a very expensive addiction. Because it seemed like he could probably just afford his life, but not that expensive addiction without someone like Nancy, who was making way more money than he did. Which is kind of crazy, because at one point he was pretty successful at his job. FEMA chose 2 videographers to go to Ground Zero at the time, and he was actually one of them. He went there right after 9/11 happened, and he taped all the devastation that was left there. But now everything has changed. And even though Nancy was about to divorce his ass, they decided to spend New Year's Eve together with their families, because they've been married for a long time. They had a little bit of party, and Nancy went outside because Kurt just kind of disappeared from the house that they were visiting, so she followed him. And in the driveway of his family's New Year's Eve party, he was doing drugs with another stranger, with another woman, and not even someone from the party. Not that it matters, but what? So she was like, this is freaking ridiculous. And they started arguing, and then they decided to go home. Police officers and investigators suspect that Nancy at this point was pretty fed up. She was about to go home to kick out Kurt, or probably for her to, just get some stuff and go to a hotel room. So they went home. They got there pretty late, around 1:40 a.m. And that's when Kurt made a really frantic call to 911 saying, "Help, help! Oh my God. My wife shot herself." So the dispatch said, okay, we'll send someone over. The police arrived, and immediately they did not believe him for so many reasons. A lot of detectives said that when someone takes their lives and someone is in the vicinity, in the same house, typically not in the same room, but in the same house, or it could be just, the same general area. And when that happens, it's called attempted suicide. And a lot of investigators do not like it for many reasons. Because the psychology of someone who's in the dark place is that they typically get towards public areas or completely alone. They usually don't do it when their loved ones are in the vicinity. They usually wait until the house is empty, until they can be alone, or they go away to a secluded area like a hotel room or a forest or something, so that they can be alone at the time of their unaliving. So it just seemed really strange, especially because Nancy had the ability to go somewhere else, and she had the ability to rent a hotel room. And it was an awful strange way to start the New Year's. Also, she was very successful at her job. Yeah, her marriage was crumbling, but she was 36, she was beautiful. It didn't seem like she was in that mental space that, oh, I'm a divorcee. No, She had her whole life ahead of her with a perceivably bright future, and so everyone was just confused. Another thing that the investigators realized is that the ballistics of everything didn't really make sense. Meaning that the wound was a gunshot wound, but there was no point of contact, which means that the weapon was not leaned up to the skull. And it was also penetrating from behind her ear, which is a really uncomfortable way to hold a weapon like this. When Gert was questioned, he immediately gave the investigators tips and suggestions. And if you just saw your wife do this, or you heard your wife do this, would you be in a position where you just say, did you check Nancy's head for gunpowder residue? If everyone's taking it for a given that she did this, and you also believe that she did, then why do you even bring it up? Also, on top of that, he had this really fine mist of blood on his face. They even asked him, like, we can see it. What is it doing on your face? And he said that, when I found her, she was kind of propped over like this. So I lifted her up and she kind of regurgitated. But they said that was not consistent because they couldn't find any blood in her nose or in her mouth. And he also mentioned that he was in another room in his office, I believe. Yeah, in his office. And you only get dismissed if you are in the vicinity. So if you are close to the gun when it fires. One more thing that was really alarming for the police was that he did not have any gunpowder residue on his hands, but it was all over his clothes. And if he wasn't in the room when the gun went off, it shouldn't be on any of his clothes, even if he hugged her afterwards. His defense attorney had a really strange way of describing things. She said that the police did a shady investigation. They didn't really care, they barely even investigated. Then she gave her own version of events. She said that Nancy was sad, she was depressed, and she even wrote a letter in which it's clear that she was going to take her life. And okay, so the letter was a Walt Whitman quote, and it said, "What indeed is finally beautiful, except death and love? Kurt, please get help." Walt Whitman was one of her favorite authors. Kurt's eternity thinks that this is a clear letter, but the police department didn't really think so. Because they've seen a lot of suicide letters, but none of these letters are quotes from favorite authors. With this letter, because the word death is in there, you could try to spin it and make it seem like it was I'm sorry, life's hard, I have to do this. But still, there would have been something like a goodbye, a reason, anything. But the police said that this is not an unalive letter. That's just her way of saying goodbye to Kurt. See you bro, good luck, peace out, get alive. Sorry. And that's just her leaving. But not dying. But his eternity was saying, no, absolutely, this is that letter, the police is lying. They were missed it in the first place, it was right there on the dresser. So the police obviously wanted this to be a homicide. At this point, the DA's office in Colorado did something that was really rare, which was that they dropped the charges on Kurt. Because they felt that if they were to go on trial right now, they didn't have enough evidence at that point. And his attorney was coming in hard, and she was just attacking every part of the investigation. So they dropped charges without prejudice. which means that they were not ruling him out as a suspect and they were not dropping the case. This means that they are still investigating him, they just don't want to go to trial. And it was a really smart move. Except not really, because... okay, so because then Kurt was like, you know what would be a better way to spend my weekend than to go to Argentina? And he technically could still leave the country because he had no charges against him. But no one thought he was going to leave. And originally I think he went to Argentina just for a quick trip. But then all of a sudden, a couple days into his stay, he was at the restaurant and he met this woman by the name of Paula. And he decided that he wanted to stay. And 40 days later, he was married to Paula and he had a visa to stay in Argentina. A couple years passed and he was still in Argentina, married to Paula. They were setting up a life and they had 2 children together. And that's when the police realized some really crucial evidence. One of which was his alibi, that he was in his office working on his computer. They checked and they ran the computer forensics. I think that's what they're called. And they realized that the last time he used his computer was at 7 p.m. that day. I remember his 911 call was made at 1:40 a.m. so it hadn't been used for that long. At this point they decided to issue another arrest warrant for him, and this time they were confident to go to trial for the murder of Nancy. And that's when they realized that he had fled the country. So they put him in the wanted list for Colorado, and they also decided to call Interpol. And I don't know if they called them, but they contacted them. Interpol is international police. Interpol contacted Argentina with all the papers for extradition, and they arrested Kurt. Now Paula here is really crucial. Yeah, she's beautiful, she's smart, she seems like a good wife. But a lot of people suspect that you chose Paula for another reason. And that's because she was a really strong human rights activist in Argentina. She was very good with her words, very eloquent. She did a lot of interviews and she spoke to a lot of Argentinian journalists, even American ones. You know, they had 2 daughters whom she would kind of use. She said that they were soldiers to the cause. She had her daughters hold up these posters of their family that said, "Please help, the United States is trying to assassinate my father." Or like, "The United States is trying to kill my father." So the 2 daughters would stand on the streets of Argentina and hold up these posters. And they were really cute and they looked very sad. And then she would do all this journalist stuff, saying, "This is disgusting." Argentina had a hard time deciding what to do. So the judge ultimately decided to deny the extradition request because Colorado had capital punishment. And if they extradited Kurt to Colorado and he was tried for murder, that state would be violation of fundamental human rights. Then the head of Colorado's DEA sent these papers to Argentina clarifying that they would not seek the death penalty for Kurt. At this point, Colorado police were getting even more frustrated because now they had all this incriminating evidence. It wasn't even just a computer. They also found Kurt's DNA under Nancy's fingernails. There were also bruising on her wrists and her hands, which is a sign of struggle. And what's even worse is that Kurt was in a Colorado prison for a couple of months before they dropped the charges the first time. One of them said that it was strange because he asked him, "Did you do it? Because everyone here is saying that you did." And he replied, "Yeah, but I'm gonna get away with it. Don't even worry about it. Don't even worry about gunpowder residue because, there is a thing called sarin wrap." So the police department and a lot of people in America believed 1,000% that he was guilty. At this point, Kurt and his family decided that they needed a campaign of their own. So he wrote a book that was only released in Spanish, and he wrote to one of the most famous Argentinian news network, telling the story of how he was mistreated by the Colorado police when they arrested him the first time. They put him in a chokehold and they were punching and kicking him. And he said that it was because he was at ground zero. He found out a lot. He was working really close to the government and the cleanup crew. And the black box of the plane was gone. And the government said that it disintegrated with everything, and it was just so convenient that on the second day, they already had these trucks come in, roll around and do all the cleanup process, just rolling around in all the evidence. And that's where he told his supervisor about it, and then they just told him to go home. And a year later, he was framed for the murder of his wife. Now what's interesting is that he has never spoken about this before. At this point, everybody had their own little crazy theories, and this story helped him a lot.
I'm here to help. Get to know Siri at apple.com.
Because politically speaking, Argentina at the time had an election going on. Former President Cristina had a really strong campaign, and he was not favoring America as a country, politically speaking. And the news networks were saying that if you don't hear the news from America in Colorado, would you really be able to compassionate towards Nancy? And in America, Kurt was, a well-known fugitive, a drug abuser, a wife abuser, all of these things. But in Argentina, he was a brave whistleblower. Every extradition request was getting slapped down by Argentina because it is a country that's highly against capital punishment. And even though Colorado promised not to seek capital punishment, how can you trust another government when you don't even trust your own? There were a lot of human rights activists standing beside him, including Paula. Now, everybody was really interested because the president, Cristina, was now running out of office. But on her last day in office as the president of Argentina, she granted permanent political asylum, meaning the United States can never request an extradition for Kurt. And it just doesn't make any sense. What he was providing was not evidence. It was not a new whistleblowing information proof. He was just saying the same thing that you can read on the first page of Reddit if you type in conspiracies. But it's just crazy. Imagine you lose your loved ones in such a crazy, vicious way. And the person that you suspect did it now is praised in a different country and being seen as this hero, this morally correct person. Well, this case got emotional. It was just so good feeling, like he spun everything. It sounds like crazy, but it's it's dirty. Let me know if you have any stories or recommendations on what you would like me to cover. Check out my other videos and see you next time. Bye!